doesn't care about you. That's why you need a medical emergency kit. It contains life-saving medications like ivermectin, Z-Pak, and antibiotics. Stock them before they block them.
This is a special report.
Knowing how to invest your money is harder than ever before. Dealing with stock market volatility, record debt, and terrorist attacks requires new thinking. At US Asset Management, we can help you see the world more clearly so that you can move beyond the chaos and invest with confidence. Call us, visit us online, or drop by our office. US Asset Management, helping you make better decisions with your money.
Where are we going next, Bill?
Well, we're going to talk about this odd connection between Georgia and Ukraine. In order to do this, I want to also start by giving acknowledgement to one of the folks that has been working diligently daily, bringing up, finding information, analyzing election integrity, voter rolls, voting history, the law, other things, and frequently making discoveries and pressing the system for answers to those discoveries. His name is Kevin Monkla, and we've had him on the show in the past. I hope to have him on this week, a little bit later on Sunday. And he brought out something that many found astounding today, albeit it was in some documents that we probably should have found but did not. And it wraps around this gentleman, William Duffey, who is a retired judge. He was assigned as the Georgia State Election Board chairman back a couple of years ago when Mashburn was moving on to other things. And he took over the reins and took the organization forward. There were lots of hopes about his presence. He was a former federal judge. Lots of folks said, "Gosh, he seems like a pretty good guy." And then today, we see a report from Kevin Monkla on one of his findings, and here's what it says: Meet retired federal judge and former Georgia State Election Board Chairman William Duffey. Judge Duffey resigned after we caught him having the board vote to adopt a consent agreement without ever seeing the document to whitewash Fulton County's manipulation of the 2020 hand count results. Now, you recall we've talked about this ad infinitum. This is part and parcel of the Joseph Rossi and Kevin Monkla complaints that had been made to the state election board. In the middle of that, one of the things that happened, if you recall, is Governor Kemp's team themselves passed along a letter that became part and parcel of that complaint. And apparently, at a point last year, he attempted to get the state election board to vote on a consent agreement to do away with this investigation, if you will, or to settle it, without ever showing the consent agreement, to the state election board. When pressed on this through what I understand now to be an open records request, apparently that precipitated William Duffey's resignation from the state election board. Very interesting.
Yes. Here
he shows that he also made 9 visits to Ukraine. Now, we understand that many of these were prior to his time during as chairman of the state election board. But still, how many folks have we noted that have made time to go to Ukraine?
Yeah.
Ever since the war started, some had gone before. Pardon me. Many of our own officials, as late as a couple of weeks ago, senators were meeting with Zelensky, apparently in order to potentially form a dialogue against Trump's plan to form a peace agreement. What were these visits about? Well, they're supposedly about him briefing the Ukrainians on how to have an ethical set of procedures in their judiciary. That seems interesting, but perhaps surprising. And of course, now we see in the background too that one of the people he appears to be meeting with is associated with U.S. aid.
Yeah, so this is hold on to this picture. I want we're going to take a little walk through history here. It's not going to be long, but I want to just highlight some things so that you can understand, one, that we know what we're talking about here, and two, why this is so concerning to us. I mean, everybody is finally seeing what Zelensky is. I don't think there's any doubt that Ukraine is seen now as a massive money laundering operation, and a lot of it coming back through Act Blue and Win Red, unfortunately, into candidate coffers and other places. That is all going to come out. Tucker's talked about that recently. But I want to just walk you through. In 2015, 14, and 15, I started building a team in Ukraine because we were building a news organization. I was working for the Washington Times at the time and Newsmax, actually. And I was all over Eastern Europe and was writing for a lot of Eastern European newspapers. In fact, Novaya Vremya, which means New Time in Kiev, saw some of the stuff I was writing about Russia. They asked me to write for them. So I wrote for Novaya Vremya in Kiev for some time, mostly about Russian-Ukraine issues. And while I was there, I met this gentleman, Artem Sitnik, who was put in, it was the head of the National Anti-Corruption Bureau in Ukraine. Later, we found out that this organization was set up by the Soros regime in Ukraine and really was not fighting corruption at all. It was a unconstitutional add-on board, kind of like the Federal Reserve, to stop corruption from coming out and to cut it off and to take the evidence and black hole it, memory hole it, etc. So that's Artem Sitnik. So after I met with him, nice enough gentleman. I built a relationship with his team. Svetlana was his comms manager. I knew her well. So then comes the Trump election in 2016. And this gentleman, or you may know, Paul Manafort. Let me scroll that down. I was writing for the Washington Times. This is the article I wrote in 2016. And if you remember, the black book, which Paul Manafort was said to have put ledger entries into that were not the real books of taking money from, oligarchs or organized crime or whatever. Well, that came out from Artem Sitnik's group. I called Svetlana and I said, what is this? I mean, you didn't tell me about this. I just met with you. And she said, oh, we just found this document on the internet. We don't really know if it's real. So this was put out through the New York Times as something that got Paul Manafort fired from the Trump campaign. So Artem Sitnik's group was working against the Trump campaign. I want you to remember that. So then let's go to this video. This is Glenn Beck. I'm not going to play the whole thing, but if you listen to Glenn, he talks about Artem Sitnik. And then after about a minute of this, I'll come back.
In April, former Prosecutor General Lysenko, the good guy, remember, that came in after the bad guy was taken out? He decides to give an interview with Ukrainian media. And in that interview, he makes a stunning comment, quote, I don't know how, but the Americans got an audio recording of Mr., how do you say his name? Sitnik, of his conversation. Now, that's the guy who ran the Anti-Corruption Bureau. He was resting with his family and friends now and discussing how he'd like to help Hillary. So the guy who was in charge of the anti-corruption, they caught him on tape talking about how he'd like to. Well, let me play it for you. Now, this is the first time, strange because it's been out in the newspapers in Ukraine. This is the first time that we know of that this has been translated by anyone in the media in English. I just want you to listen. Now, the speaker you're going to hear is Director Sitnik, and this is what he said. Listen.
Помогали им все-таки эти русские? Ну, ваши.
Я думаю, что да.
Да?
Я ж ему тоже помогу. Ну, ему, а Хиллари помогла.
А, ты делаешь там трошки шатнули, да.
Я тут так пишут там.
Но мне кажется, Хиллари погано было, не думаю.
So Sitnik was on tape, the guy I met with who runs the Anti-Corruption Bureau in Ukraine, admitting he was helping Hillary against President Trump, essentially interfering in U.S. elections in Ukraine. This has been out there, but it's not on for years, but it's not on mainstream media. We reported all this. Now, let me take you, this is the last step in this whole thing, and then I'll tell you where this is going. This is an article that's on CDM right now in the headline. This was published in 23. We just republished it. In 18 and 19, a group of Ukrainians that I knew in Ukraine were flown to DOJ in Los Angeles. They had massive amounts of information and cases on American officials in Ukraine laundering money and interfering in elections out of Ukraine. So this was all reported to the House Oversight Committee, Congressman Comey's attorneys in 23. So let's get back to this. Can you put that picture back up there, please, Bill? The guy next to Mr. Duffey is Anatoly Marcinkiewicz. He's a judge. He was working closely with Sitnik and others, laundering money and putting in corrupt judges in Ukraine. So I'm not accusing Judge Duffey of anything, but I'm saying he's running with some very bad people. And all of this information, we have a lot more, but we're not going to talk about it. But all of this information is quite concerning, and it's been given to Congress on all of this, congressional investigators. So that's what I wanted to bring out, Bill, that the connections are just really, really bizarre, and I think need to be investigated further. What say you?
I think it's exactly like what we see going on with Doge. As you dig into the connections between USAID and NGOs, between those NGOs and certain criminal activities, you begin to fill in the picture, but the picture looks like a spider web in many cases because so many people are connected to others. I didn't see this one coming, but now that we do, isn't it interesting that your background and the team's background fills in information that was not apparent even earlier today when this thing surfaced. So as you say, there's more information out there, not quite ready for prime time yet, but I suspect there's even more beyond this once we learn more about these players, who else they're connected to, and other things. It's like you said earlier, it just seems to be pieces coming together because maybe they're supposed to.
Maybe. It's concerning that the head of the election bureau in Georgia was hanging out with this crowd. I have to say, we know about USAID, the gentleman on the right. We know that just got shut down because they were essentially funding a lot of nefarious activity,
including the news media over there, as I recall.
Yes, and in the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, we're going to stay on this, but it is a fascinating story. And when people say that our elections are fine, there's a lot of questions. I mean, we know they're not.